You know those moments in life when you look back and think, I should have seen it coming? Yeah, well, mine started on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My wedding day. Except it wasn't just a disaster. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would blow my entire family apart. I always thought I came from a pretty normal family. We had Sunday dinners, awkward holiday photos, and the usual gossip behind each other's backs. Nothing too explosive. But when I brought Mark into the picture, the hidden cracks started to split open. He was charming, too charming honestly, and now that I think about it, the kind of guy who always had to be the center of attention. My parents adored him. My sister hated him. My brother ignored him. That should have been enough of a red flag. The morning of the wedding was pure chaos. My dress wasn't fitting right. The caterer forgot the vegan menu for my cousin, and my maid of honor, aka my best friend since 3rd grade, was mysteriously missing in action. I thought she was just running late or maybe dealing with one of her random panic attacks. I had no idea what she was really doing. As I walked down the aisle, I tried to focus on Mark. He was standing there, looking handsome and smug, like he was starring in his own personal movie. Everyone was watching me, smiling, pretending this was all perfect, but my sister wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept glancing between me and Mark like she wanted to scream. Later, I found out why. The ceremony went on like a dream, or rather a nightmare in disguise. We exchanged vows, kissed, took photos, did the whole cake-cutting routine. People clapped, toasted, danced. My dad cried. My mom looked proud. And through it all, I felt this strange pressure building in my chest, like I was holding something in without knowing what it was. At midnight, when the guests were starting to leave and the champagne was kicking in, my sister finally snapped. She pulled me aside and told me something I will never forget for the rest of my life. And no, it wasn't something small or something I could ignore. It was the kind of truth that rips you open from the inside. I didn't believe her at first. I told myself she was jealous, bitter, maybe even drunk. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw it. That haunted look. That look of someone who knows they've been carrying a secret way too heavy for way too long. She didn't say much, but what she did say made my stomach turn. Mark had been cheating on me, and not just with anyone, with my best friend, my maid of honor, the one who'd conveniently disappeared that morning. Suddenly everything clicked. The missed calls, the weird glances, the way she avoided me lately. I felt like such an idiot. But worse than that, I felt like my entire life had been a lie. I ran. I didn't even tell anyone. I grabbed my dress, tore off my heels, and ran straight out of that reception hall like some unhinged bride from a horror movie. The worst part? No one came after me, not even Mark. Do you ever wonder what you'd do in a moment like that? Would you scream? Cry? Hit someone? I didn't do any of that. I just kept running until I hit the parking lot, sat on the curb, and let the cold night swallow me whole. That night didn't just end my wedding. It ended my innocence, my belief in people, and my connection to the ones I thought would never betray me. But it was only the beginning. What would you do if your entire family watched you marry someone they knew was betraying you? Would you forgive them, or would you burn every bridge down? Stick around, because this story only gets messier from here. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I was supposed to be on a plane with Mark, heading to a beach in Bali for our honeymoon, sipping cocktails and pretending our love was eternal. Instead, I was curled up in the back seat of my car, still in my wedding dress, mascara streaked across my face, staring at the dashboard like it held the answers to everything that had just fallen apart. The silence was louder than any screaming. My phone buzzed nonstop for hours. Missed calls, messages from family, from Mark, from people I didn't even know cared. I didn't answer a single one. I just sat there, numb, letting the weight of everything crash on top of me like a slow-motion avalanche. The sun came up and made me feel sick. Morning light always does that when your life just imploded. It's like the world dares you to pretend everything is fine while your heart is still bleeding out. I drove straight to my sister's house. She was the only one I could even stand to look at. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't even ask questions. She just opened the door and handed me a pair of sweatpants. Funny how betrayal can bond people in ways love never could. I stayed with her for a few days. Mark kept trying to reach me, voicemails full of apologies and twisted logic. At one point, he even claimed it wasn't cheating if it only happened a few times. Can you believe that? As if counting sins makes them any less real. My parents were worse. They acted like it was all just a misunderstanding. Like this could somehow be fixed with therapy or a vacation or prayer. I wanted to scream at them. How could they be so blind? Or worse, did they know? Had they heard rumors and just swept it under the rug for the sake of a picture-perfect wedding? And then came the real kicker. My brother. Now, you need to understand, my brother and I were close once. He was the quiet one, always in the background, never the drama. But when he finally called me, it wasn't to comfort me. It was to confess something I never saw coming. He knew. Not just about the cheating. He knew it for months. He had walked in on Mark and my best friend at some party, tangled up in each other, thinking the room was empty. And instead of telling me, he said nothing. Because he thought I wouldn't believe him. Because he didn't want to ruin my big day. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about Mark. This was about everyone. My whole family. The people I trusted to protect me, to tell me the truth, to have my back. They all stayed silent. Every single one. So I cut them off. Cold. I packed a bag, took some of the money I'd saved for the honeymoon, and disappeared for a while. I didn't tell anyone where I went. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't remind me of what I'd lost. Ever been in a place like that? Where every song, every smell, every shadow drags you back to a moment you're trying to erase. I ended up in a small town by the coast. Rented a room above a bookstore. Lived off instant noodles and red wine. And tried to forget the life I just left behind. I started journaling, not because I thought it would help, but because I needed to see my pain in black and white. But even in that quiet place, the past kept bleeding through. People say time heals. Maybe it does. But only if you let it. And I wasn't ready. I was still too angry, too broken, too hungry for the kind of closure I knew I'd never get. Then, one night, I got a message that pulled me right back in. Not from Mark. Not from my parents. It was my best friend. The one who ruined everything. She said she needed to talk. That it wasn't what I thought. That there was more to the story. Of course there was. There always is. So here I was, standing at the edge of a new life, being pulled backward by the same people who crushed me. And part of me wanted to hear her out. To finally understand why she did what she did. But another part of me, the part that had learned not to trust so easily, that part was screaming no. What would you do? Would you meet her? Or would you let the silence finally bury the past for good? Because trust me, this story is far from over. I stared at the message for over an hour. The text just sat there on my phone, glowing like a wound I wasn't ready to touch. I must have read it 100 times. I need to talk to you. It's not what you think. Please, that was it.
No explanation. No apology.
Just a dangling thread of mystery. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the deep, rotting need for closure. Or maybe it was just the part of me that still wanted to believe not everyone I loved had turned into a stranger. Either way, I said yes. We met at a cafe a few towns over. I chose the place because it was neutral, public, and had terrible coffee. I figured if things got emotional or ugly, I could disappear quickly. She walked in like she didn't just sleep with my husband on the eve of our wedding. Like this was just a normal day, and we were just old friends catching up. I hated how beautiful she looked. Polished, put together, not a single sign of guilt on her face. I sat there, fists clenched in my lap, while she slid into the seat across from me like she belonged there. Then she dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. And the worst part? She didn't know if it was Mark's or not. My ears started ringing. I didn't even respond. Just sat there, staring at her, trying to process the levels of betrayal stacking up like some sick game of emotional Jenga. She said it happened only a few times. That it wasn't meant to go that far. That they both felt horrible. But she also said something else. Something I hadn't considered. She claimed Mark used her. Not just for sex. For information. For control. For leverage. He had manipulated her. twisted her loyalty, made her feel like she owed him something, said things that made her question her worth, her sanity, her friendships. According to her, he had a pattern. A long one. Women, lies, secrets, all neatly hidden behind that charming grin and perfect timing. She wasn't just a mistake. She was one in a long line of them. I should have left right then. But she wasn't finished. She said Mark had something on my family. Something big. And that's why no one told me the truth. That's why everyone stayed silent. He was blackmailing them. It sounded insane, like a twisted plot from a bad soap opera. But deep down, I believed her, because nothing else made sense. Why else would my brother stay quiet? Why else would my parents protect a man they barely knew? The conversation ended with no resolution, just more questions. I left that cafe with shaking hands and a heart ready to crack in half all over again. I drove straight to my parents' house, parked across the street, watched the lights inside flicker as they moved through their evening routine. It all looked so normal from the outside, but inside that house, secrets were rotting the walls. I didn't go in, not that night. Instead, I started digging. I went through old emails, family documents, anything that might explain what Mark had on them. And slowly, piece by piece, I started uncovering the truth. My father had been hiding something, a financial scandal, one that could ruin his reputation. Years ago, he'd funneled money from one of his companies into an offshore account under my mother's name. They'd buried it, forgotten it, moved on. But Mark found out, and he used it to force their silence, to make them accept him, to keep me in the dark. It made me sick. My wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction, a performance, and I was the idiot bride in the middle of it all, dancing to the tune they all played. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I found something else. A photo, a blurry shot of Mark, with someone I didn't recognize. A man, older.
Familiar.
The timestamp showed it was taken a week before the wedding. I stared at that photo for hours, and then it hit me. The man in the photo was my uncle, the one who disappeared 10 years ago after a falling out with the family, the one no one talked about anymore. And somehow Mark knew him. What was their connection? What did Mark really want? I wasn't just betrayed. I was being played. And the game wasn't over. If your entire life turned out to be built on lies, what would you do? Would you keep digging? Or walk away before the truth swallows you whole? Because for me, I was just getting started. They say every family has skeletons in the closet.
Mine?
We buried ours so deep, they started growing roots. I couldn't stop looking at that photo. My uncle, my mother's brother, standing with Mark like they were old friends.
No explanasten.
No context. Just a single, damning image that changed everything. You have to understand, Uncle Theo was like a ghost in our family. One day he was there loud, charming, unpredictable, and the next, gone.
No gudbie. No explanasten.
Just erased. My mom said he'd left after a bad business deal and never looked back. My dad always changed the subject when his name came up. We weren't supposed to ask questions. But now I had questions. 1,000 of them. I knew if I wanted answers, I couldn't rely on my parents. They were already deep in their own mess. So I did what any desperate, half-broken woman with nothing left to lose would do. I found Theo myself. It wasn't hard. People leave trails, even ghosts. I followed a string of property records, old addresses, and a very sketchy contact in a Facebook group for former corporate investigators. And then there he was, living under a different last name in a quiet lakeside town 2 hours from where I grew up. I didn't tell him who I was when I first reached out. I just said I needed to meet, told him I had questions about Mark. That name alone got me a response. He agreed to see me. Neutral ground, public park, middle of the day. When I showed up and he saw me, his face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. I guess in a way he had. He didn't say my name, didn't say anything for a long minute. Then, just like that, he said he knew this day would come. I wasn't ready for what he told me. Mark wasn't a stranger. He was family, my cousin.
Tio é som.
He had changed his last name years ago, cut ties with everyone, and built a new life. But not for nothing. Not for peace. For revenge. Apparently, when Theo vanished, it wasn't because of a failed business. It was because of my father. My dad had framed him for embezzlement to cover up his own financial crimes. Theo lost everything, his company, his friends, his reputation. My mother knew. She begged him to stay quiet, promised to make things right. But when he threatened to go public, my father used his influence to shut him down completely. Theo took the fall and disappeared. His wife left. He raised Mark alone, feeding him the truth from day one. And Mark grew up hating us. All of us. I was never the prize. I was the punishment. Theo said he never wanted Mark to go this far. He thought the anger would fade. But it didn't. Turned into obsession. Mark worked his way into my life with a plan. To charm me. To marry me. To destroy my family from the inside. And I had walked straight into it like a fool in love. When I asked why Theo was telling me this now, he looked broken. Said Mark had stopped answering his calls. That something had changed. That this wasn't about justice anymore. It was about destruction. And he didn't want to see me go down with the rest of them. I left that meeting with my heart in pieces. Betrayed again, but in a different way. This time, by blood I didn't even know I had. Back home, I started putting the pieces together. The silence from my parents. The forced smiles. The way they'd welcomed Mark so quickly. Almost too quickly. Deep down, they knew who he was. They knew the risk. But instead of warning me, they let me become the sacrificial lamb. Because in their twisted minds, it was better to lose a daughter than to face the truth. I felt sick, used, furious, and somehow still not finished. There was one person I hadn't spoken to yet. Mark. He was still out there, silent, watching, probably thinking I was still too weak to fight back. But he didn't know what I knew now. He didn't know what I had planned next. What would you do if the man you loved turned out to be your cousin, on a mission to destroy everything you ever believed in? Would you expose him? Or would you make him pay another way? Because revenge runs in the family. And I was ready to take my turn. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But mine was boiling. Scalding.
Pure rage repti na smile.
I didn't cry anymore. That version of me was gone. The heartbroken bride? Buried. What rose from her ashes wasn't soft or forgiving. She was something else entirely. She was me without illusions. And she wanted blood. I started with my parents. I walked right into their perfect little house with its spotless white walls and pretended like I wasn't about to tear it all down. They acted relieved to see me. Tried to hug me like nothing had happened. Like they didn't sell me out to protect their precious reputation. I let them speak. Let them lie. Then I dropped the truth like a bomb. I told them I knew about Theo. About the offshore accounts. About the photo. About Mark being his son. My cousin. Their future son-in-law. Their ticking time bomb. The silence that followed was the most honest thing they'd ever given me. My mother cried. My father? He went pale and sat down like he'd aged 20 years in a second. Could have screamed at them. Could have demanded answers. But I didn't. I didn't need their confessions. I had everything I needed. I left that house with the kind of power you only get after crawling through hell and coming back fireproof. Next came the plan. I needed to find Mark. He'd gone underground, off social media, off the radar. Coward. But people like him, they can't resist watching their chaos unfold. I knew he was still watching me, waiting for his final victory lap. He probably thought I'd vanish, hide in shame, cry in corners. Instead, I gave him a show. I posted a photo of me smiling.
No caption.
Just me, staring straight into the camera. I wanted him to see that I knew. I wanted him to feel it. It worked. 2 days later, I got a message from an unknown number. He wanted to meet. Of course he did. I agreed. Neutral ground again. A rooftop bar in the city. The kind of place we used to visit when we played pretend as the perfect couple. I wore black. Not because it was dramatic, but because it made me feel like armor. He showed up late, as always, like the world revolved around his entrance. He looked the same but smaller somehow. Still charming. Still smug. But there was a crack in the facade now. I saw it in his eyes. He didn't expect me to know everything. He started talking like he had control. I didn't even flinch. I told him I knew everything. About Theo. About the revenge plan. About the years he spent infiltrating my life, twisting it into a weapon. He laughed. Of course he laughed. Because to him, this wasn't betrayal. It was victory. He said I was just collateral. That I was never supposed to get hurt, but if I did, so be it. That he'd done what my family deserved. That he'd exposed them for what they really were. Liars, thieves, manipulators. He said I should be thanking him. That's when I smiled. Because I had something he didn't know. While he was busy building his plan, I was building mine. I'd been recording everything. Our conversation. His confession. Every word. And I had a little USB drive loaded with files from Theo's past, my father's crimes, even bank records I pulled when my mom forgot to log out of her email. All tied together. Perfect little package. I leaned in and told him I could bury him. Not just him, Theo, my dad, everyone. But I wasn't going to. Because revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about control. I told him I was going to take everything he wanted. The spotlight, the power, the satisfaction. I would go public. Not as a victim, not as a broken bride, but as the woman who survived the scam, exposed the rot, and rewrote the story on her own damn terms. And he would fade. I walked away before he could speak. That night, I uploaded the whole story to a private link. Sent it to a few journalists, a few lawyers, a few people who hated my father enough to love the scandal. Then I waited. And oh, the fallout was delicious. My father's empire cracked. Investigations opened. Quiet murmurs turned into headlines. My mother disappeared to her sister's place in shame. My brother, the loyal coward, texted me once, then never again. My former best friend finally gave birth, alone. And Mark? Gone. Off the grid. Or so I thought. Because just when I believed the storm had passed, I received something. A letter. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in handwriting I hadn't seen in weeks. Inside was one sentence. You think this is over? It wasn't. Not even close. Would you stop here? Take the win? Or would you chase the truth to the bitter end? Even if it means setting fire to the last pieces of yourself. Because me, I'm not done. Not until every secret is ashes. There's something about handwritten letters. They feel more intimate, more personal, more dangerous. You can't just delete them or block them or pretend they never happened. You have to hold them, read them, feel them. It's like someone reaching out from the past and dragging you back whether you want it or not. I stared at that envelope for what felt like forever. My name written in ink I swear I recognized. My hands trembled, not from fear, from rage. I knew it was from him, Mark. Even after everything, he still found a way to claw his way back into my life. Inside was a single sentence. You think this is over? That's all it said. No signature, no explanation, no threats. But it didn't need any, because that sentence hit like a sledgehammer. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Part of me wanted to burn it, destroy it, and pretend the story had ended. But the other part, the one that had been hardened by betrayal and lies and bloodlines turned toxic, that part wanted to know what came next. So I started digging again. I traced the postmark. Small town, a few hours away. A nothing place. Just trees and gas stations and forgotten corners. But it had one thing, an address. One that I recognized from Theo's records. One he hadn't mentioned when we met. It belonged to my grandfather. The one I thought had died years ago. Turns out that was a lie too. My mother had told me he passed from a stroke when I was 13. I even remember crying at the funeral. But that funeral wasn't his. It was a staged event, meant to close the door on a man my family wanted to erase. Just like Theo. Just like the rest of the inconvenient truths. The real story, he'd been institutionalized. Not for mental illness. For silence. He knew things. Dangerous things. About my father. About old money moved through fake charities. About government contracts. Bribes. Hidden deals. He was a risk. So they labeled him unstable, paid off the right people, and locked him away. And now? Mark had found him. Of course he had. This wasn't about me anymore. I wasn't just a target. I was the daughter of a man who had spent his life building an empire on corruption and lies. And now that empire was starting to crack, and everything beneath it was beginning to crawl out, I drove out to that facility, told them I was his granddaughter, played the sweet innocent girl looking for a family connection. They let me in. I found him in a small, dim room filled with books and dust and the heavy silence of someone forgotten for too long. He was old, frail, but when he looked at me, really looked, I saw recognition. He said my name before I could say anything. Said he'd been waiting, couldn't breathe. He told me everything. About my father's rise to power. The lies, the fraud, the betrayals that started long before I was even born. About how my mother had helped cover it all up. Not because she was evil, but because she was scared. Scared of losing her place, her comfort, her illusion of control. He said Theo was supposed to take over the business. But when he started asking too many questions, they framed him. Just like they did to my grandfather. It was a pattern, a cycle. And now Mark was simply the result of decades of rot. He didn't create this chaos. He was born from it. And me? I was supposed to carry it forward. But I refused. I sat with my grandfather for hours, listening to the history of my family unravel like thread through shaking fingers. And when I left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. I didn't care about revenge anymore. Not the petty kind. I didn't want to ruin people. I wanted to end something. Break the curse that had infected generations of my bloodline. Burn the legacy that had built nothing but pain. But I couldn't do it alone. So I called Theo, told him everything. For the first time, he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, like someone who'd finally been seen after decades of being invisible. We made a plan, together, to expose it all. Not just Mark, not just my father, but the whole sick web. There would be consequences. Legal, financial, emotional. We'd be dragging our own blood through the mud, destroying what little family name we had left. But it had to be done, because if we didn't end it, who would? And just as everything started to come together, as the final puzzle pieces clicked into place, I got another message. No words this time, just a photo of me, taken outside my apartment. That day, Mark wasn't done. And now he wasn't just watching. He was coming. If someone knew where you lived, if they were close enough to touch you without you even noticing, would you run? Or would you stand your ground, knowing the next move could be your last? Because the final game was beginning, and I wasn't planning to lose. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I just sat by the window, lights off, staring out at the street below, waiting for a ghost I used to love to show up at my door. The photo haunted me. Me standing outside my apartment, completely unaware. Someone had been right there, just feet away, and I hadn't felt a thing. That kind of violation sinks into your bones. It makes you question every sound, every shadow, every flicker of movement on the edge of your vision. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. I was ready. I had spent too long reacting to the chaos other people created. Now it was my turn to write the ending. I started preparing the apartment like it was a war zone. Not with weapons or locks, but with eyes, cameras, hidden mics, backup drives. I wanted everything recorded. If Mark was going to come for me, I'd make sure the world saw who he really was. I even left the curtains open. A signal. Adare. And then I waited. For 2 days, nothing happened. Just silence. Normalcy. The kind that feels fake when you know something dark is lurking just out of frame. I went about my routines. Showered. Worked. Slept with the lights on. Always watching. Always waiting. Then, on the third night, I heard it. A click. Soft. Barely there. But I knew my home. And that sound didn't belong. I didn't move. Just sat at the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll through my phone. My heart was pounding, but I didn't flinch. I wanted him to think I didn't know. I waited, and then he stepped out of the hallway. Mark, just like that, like he'd been invited. Calm, confident, a smile on his face that used to make me melt and now made me sick. He looked at me like nothing had changed, like I hadn't destroyed his game, exposed his lies, shattered his family. He said nothing, just stood there, staring at me. I wanted to scream, to lunge across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to speak first. He finally did, said I looked good, that I was stronger than he thought, that he respected me for that. It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to end something. He started talking about legacy, about cycles, about how my family had poisoned everything they touched, and how he was just the cure. That none of this had ever been about me, not really. I was just collateral damage, a means to an end, but also, strangely, the only person who ever made him question his path. He said he loved me. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't believe him. He moved closer, just a few steps, enough to trigger the camera hidden in the ceiling vent. I told him to stop. He didn't, and that's when I pulled out the flash drive, the one with every recording, every document, every secret I'd collected from my grandfather, from Theo, from the family I no longer claimed. I held it out like it was a weapon. He froze, because he knew exactly what it was. I told him I'd already made copies, sent them to people, journalists, lawyers, enemies of my father, that no matter what he did to me now, it wouldn't matter. His game was over. He asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted the truth, all of it, not just what he wanted me to know, the whole picture, the real reason he chose me, because deep down, I knew there was something more, something no one had told me yet. He looked away, and then he gave it to me. Theo hadn't just raised him to hate my family. He had raised him to destroy a specific person, me, not for what I'd done, but for who I was, because according to Theo, I wasn't just the daughter of a corrupt businessman. I was the reason everything had fallen apart. When I was born, my father had made a deal to protect me, a deal that involved throwing Theo under the bus. The fake embezzlement charges, the exile, the silence, it had all been to save me. I was the leverage, the secret, the price. And Mark had grown up knowing that, knowing I had cost his father everything. He didn't fall in love with me by accident. He had been watching me my entire life, planning, waiting. So when he said he loved me, I realized it was both true and false. He loved the version of me he'd imagined, the weapon, the symbol, not the person, not me. I told him to leave. He didn't argue. He just looked at me one last time and said he hoped I'd finish what he started. Then he walked out, and I haven't seen him since. But the fallout? That was just beginning. The files I leaked spread like wildfire. My family name was dragged through every headline. Bank accounts frozen. Investigations launched. Secrets exposed. One by one, every rotten brick collapsed. And me? I was free. But freedom is a strange thing when your past still echoes in every room. Because Mark might be gone, but the legacy he tried to destroy still haunts me, and something tells me he's not done. Would you feel safe after that? Would you look over your shoulder forever? Or would you rebuild from the rubble, knowing the past could knock again at any moment? Because next time, I won't wait. People think once the truth comes out, you feel better. That exposing the liars, the cheaters, the manipulators, that burning it all down, will somehow make you whole again. They're wrong. What comes after isn't peace. It's silence. The kind that echoes too loudly in an empty house. After the files were released, everything happened so fast. My father resigned from his companies. A quiet exit cloaked in legal language and fake dignity. But the media wasn't fooled. Headlines screamed. Reporters circled. The empire he'd spent decades building was gutted in weeks. My mother tried to disappear. She fled to a wellness retreat in Switzerland, as if meditation and green juice could cleanse the stain of decades of lies. She didn't call. Not once. I didn't expect her to. Theo was arrested. Not for what he'd done, but for what he knew. The charges were old, buried, but the exposure dragged them back into daylight. It didn't matter that he was a victim too. In the eyes of the law, everyone who stayed quiet was guilty, even the ones trying to fix it. I visited him once in custody. He looked tired. Not defeated, just done. He said he didn't regret anything. That maybe now, finally, the story would end. I didn't tell him the whole truth. That I'd kept one file for myself. One piece of the puzzle I hadn't shared with anyone. It wasn't about money or power. It was about me. A DNA test. Something I found while digging through encrypted folders my grandfather had kept. It wasn't labeled clearly. Just a string of numbers and dates that felt oddly familiar. I almost missed it. But when I opened it, everything changed. Because according to that document, my father wasn't my biological father. My mother had had an affair, and the man listed on that test, Teo, he wasn't just my uncle. He was my real father. I don't remember how long I sat there staring at the screen. Felt like my entire body went numb, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every memory of childhood twisted in my mind. Every scolding, every fake smile, every lie stacked on top of another. My whole life had been a carefully constructed illusion. And the truth? It was uglier than I ever imagined. Theo had known. That's why he'd protected me. Why he'd stopped Mark. Because I was his daughter. The one thing he never meant to destroy. Suddenly, Mark's rage made even more sense. I wasn't just a symbol of what his father lost. I was the result of it. We were both poisoned by the same family. Both born into a story we didn't ask for. But now I had to decide what to do with that truth. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not my grandfather. Definitely not the press. This secret was mine. And after a lifetime of being manipulated, I needed something no one else could touch. I thought about reaching out to Mark. Not to reconnect. Not for love. But to give him the truth. Maybe even to say sorry, in some strange, broken way. But I didn't. Instead, I moved. New city. New name. Nothing flashy. Just space to breathe. I took a job at a bookstore. Spent my days surrounded by quiet pages and stories that, for once, weren't mine. I told people I was a writer doing research. It wasn't a lie. Not really. Because I was writing it all down. Every detail. Not for revenge. But so it wouldn't be forgotten. I still check my windows at night. Still flinch when I see someone watching too long. The scars from what happened don't fade. They just settle into the background like wallpaper you learn to ignore. Sometimes I wonder what Mark's doing now. If he's still out there watching. If he knows. If he'd care. But most of the time I just hope he stays gone. Some stories don't get happy endings. Some don't even get closure. They just get quiet. But if you were me, holding on to the final secret of your life, the one truth that changes everything, would you tell the world? Or let it die with you? Because some fires never really go out. They just burn low, waiting. It had been 6 months since I left everything behind. 6 months of silence. No press. No phone calls. No letters. Just bookshelves, black coffee, and the occasional flicker of peace. I started to believe I might actually be free. That maybe the ghosts had finally given up. But they never really do. Started with a phone call. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me swipe. It was a woman. Soft voice. Shaking. She asked if I was who I used to be. I said no. She didn't believe me. She said she had a message. From Mark. I hung up. I didn't want to hear it. Couldn't. Not after everything. But the sound of her voice stuck in my ears like a splinter. Something about the way she said his name. It wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was desperate. A few days later, I came home from work and found an envelope taped to my door. No name.
No stamp.
Just my old nickname, the one only Mark ever used. Inside was a USB drive. I stared at it for hours. I didn't want to plug it in. Didn't want to know. But curiosity is a disease. One that eats you from the inside until you give in. So I watched it. The footage was grainy, like it had been shot in secret. A handheld camera, shaky and dim. Mark was in it, but he looked different. Thinner. Tired. Sitting on a bed in some dingy hotel room. His voice was low, hoarse. The way people sound when they've already lost. He said he wasn't running anymore. said everything had gone wrong. He talked about Theo, about prison, about guilt, about how this wasn't justice anymore. It was just pain repeating itself. He said he'd started following someone. A man. Someone from my grandfather's circle. A name I didn't recognize at first. But when I searched it, everything snapped into place. This man wasn't just a family friend. He was a fixer, cleaner, the one who'd helped my father fake deaths, bury evidence, forge documents. The kind of man who doesn't appear in public records but owns everything in the shadows. And now he was tying up loose ends, which meant Mark and me. The video ended with one final sentence. If you're seeing this, I'm probably already gone. I felt cold, not scared, frozen, because for the first time since all of this began, I realized something terrible. Mark wasn't the monster anymore. He was the warning, and I hadn't listened. That night, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft taps. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to let me know they were there. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, and then silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I didn't sleep.
I picked a bag.
Grabbed my laptop, my documents, the last backup of the truth I hadn't shared. And I ran. Again. Felt different this time. Not like a victim escaping, but like a witness being hunted. I stayed off-grid. Moved every few days. Changed my name again. I cut off the last person who knew me. I deleted everything. And still, I kept looking over my shoulder. Because when your family has enemies in the dark, those shadows follow you. I started seeing signs. Car parked too long. A man sitting in cafes, never ordering anything. A shadow behind me on late-night streets. Maybe I was paranoid. Or maybe they were real. But the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to survive anymore. What's the point of escaping a legacy that lives in your blood? When every time you breathe, you're reminded of where you came from. What you were born into. But then, I found one more letter. Left in a motel drawer. Underneath the Bible. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper. And it wasn't from Mark. It was from my grandfather. Handwritten. Dated the year I was born. Said he knew someday I'd need to choose. That one day, I'd learn the truth. And that when that day came, I'd have to decide whether to bury the past for good. Or finish what he couldn't. I didn't understand what he meant. Not until I read the last line. There's a vault. And inside, everything. Everything they feared you'd find. Everything worth killing for. Would you open it? Would you risk your life for answers? Because I already knew what I was going to do. Even if it meant never coming back. The building didn't look like much. Just a gray structure tucked between warehouses on the edge of a forgotten industrial district. No signs. No cameras. The kind of place you'd never notice unless someone told you exactly where to look. My grandfather's note led me here. The instructions were handwritten, precise, almost too careful. Like he knew what this moment would mean. Like he'd been writing it for me long before I ever knew who I really was. There was no one outside. No guards. No fences. Just a single rusted door with a keypad. I entered the code. It opened without resistance. Inside was a long hallway lined with metal panels and fluorescent lights that flickered like they were remembering how to die. The air smelled like old paper and colder secrets. Every step echoed like a warning. At the end of the hallway was a vault door. Real. Heavy. Circular. Like the kind you see in movies. I stood in front of it for what felt like hours. And then I opened it. No alarms. No trapdoors. Just the sound of old gears grinding against time. Inside was a single room. No money. No jewels. Just boxes. Labeled. Dated. Filed. It looked like an archive. Neat. Intentional. I pulled one down at random and opened it. Inside were photos. Letters. Contracts. Documents stamped with government seals. Legal names. Bribes. Signatures. Everything. Proof of every dirty deal. Every betrayal. Every manipulation. Names I recognized. Names I didn't. My father. My mother. Theo. Even the fixer Mark had tracked. Pages and pages of corruption going back decades. Spanning countries. Systems. Industries. This wasn't just a family scandal. This was an empire built on rot. And in the middle of it all, a file with my name. My real name. It wasn't what I expected. There was no birth certificate. No school records. Just one sentence. She doesn't know. Below it, a photo. Me, as a baby, in my mother's arms. And next to her, not Theo. Not the man I believed was my biological father. But someone else. Someone I had never seen before. His face was circled. A single word scrawled underneath. Insurance. I felt like the ground opened beneath me. Because even after everything, even after uncovering lies, betrayal, bloodlines twisted into nightmares, I still wasn't at the bottom. I was made. A tool. A pawn. Something created for leverage. I was never meant to know the truth. My existence had always been someone else's strategy. And now that I knew, I was dangerous. I left the vault with everything I could carry. Drove for hours. No destination. Just movement. Just breath. Because what do you do when your entire life is a fabrication? When even your own birth was a calculated move? You make a choice. To become the author of what comes next. I leaked parts of the files anonymously. Not all of them. Just enough. Enough to bring down the fixer. The politicians. The old guard still clinging to their dirty kingdoms. It was like lighting a fuse under a sleeping world. Explosions followed. Arrests. Resignations. Silence. I changed names again. Moved far away. No family left. No friends I could trust. But for the first time I felt real. Whole. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't a victim. Or a daughter. Or a puppet in someone else's story. I was the storm that tore it all down. People still whisper about what happened. They call it the collapse. They don't know my name. They never will. But sometimes when I walk through a new city, past crowds that don't look twice, I wonder, what if Mark had survived? What if he's still out there? What if he knows the truth too? Would he forgive me? Or would he want revenge? Maybe one day, our paths will cross again. And maybe then we'll finally understand what we were. Not enemies. Not lovers. Just two ghosts raised by lies trying to write our own ending. And if that day comes, I'll be ready. Because I was born into chaos. But I chose to become the ending. And some endings, they rewrite everything.